Yuma, which is hello in the language of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'm Mary-Anne Cosgrove, Chair of Humanists Australia. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and recognise their continuing connection to culture and country. I acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'll listen to your voices, do my best to understand your stories and lived experiences, and speak up when I see you suffering from injustice. This presentation covers 4 main topics. Part 1, fundamental questions, introduces 5 deep questions that have puzzled humans through the ages. Part 2, history of humanism, explores how humanist thinkers have thought about these 5 questions from ancient times until today. Part 3, humanism today, describes the current state of humanist organisations. If you have humanist values, you're not alone. And part 4, humanist answers, shows how humanism can be a framework for answering the 5 deep questions. For tens, even thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, humans have been wondering about their place in the universe and pondering fundamental questions about their existence. These deep fundamental questions include ones like, how can I understand the world? How can I find meaning and fulfillment in life? How can I find comfort when I'm grieving? How do I deal with the fear of my own death? How should I behave? What's right and wrong? Humans invented religions in order to help answer these questions. Humanism also developed as an approach to life that answers these questions, but unlike religion, humanism is grounded in observable reality and in compassion and respect for all humans and other feeling beings. So let's take a look at how humanism developed through the ages. There have been many, many humans from all around the world who've contributed to humanist answers to these questions. Today, we have time to look at only a few. I'd like to start with the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. For tens of thousands of years, Indigenous Australians have lived in stable societies. The ability to live relatively peacefully side by side with their neighbours for such a long period of time demands respect. How did they do it? They've passed down stories which, far from being mere superstition, embody knowledge of how to behave, when to harvest specific food sources, how and when to burn to manage the land, and especially how to live in their society and care for one another. Bruce Pascoe, author of Dark Emu and Australian Humanist of the Year 2021, has undertaken extensive study of Indigenous culture and practices. He writes, an indication of how Aboriginal cultures emphasised peace and stability is reflected in a central explanation of Yuin culture on Goolaga Mountain near Tilba on the south coast of New South Wales. You are asked to pause at the healing rock and consider the welfare of the unborn child, the ill, the troubled. He goes on to describe the story of Niari and Tunku, the first man and woman, weaving the majestic features of the landscape of Goolaga into the story as the Yuin people have done. By the time you leave the trail, he goes on, you realise that you've not seen a weapon, nor heard one story of a vanquished foe, but instead are shown the centrality of women to human life and the respect that woman, the mother, must be shown. Yuin men in formal situations use the saying, we all arise from the mother, that is the law. These stories illustrate the compassion and respect that are central to humanism. More recently, around 500 BC, Confucius was a Chinese moral philosopher, founder of the school of Confucianism, a way of life that focuses on humaneness, living a compassionate life. He said, as for humaneness, you want to establish yourself, then help others to establish themselves. You want to develop yourself, then help others to develop themselves. Being able to recognize oneself in others, one is on the way to being humane. Mengxi, also known as Mencius, was a follower of Confucius, often referred to as the second sage of Confucianism after Confucius himself. He believed that human beings have the natural capacity to know how to behave. It's part of human nature. One who lacks a mind that feels pity and compassion would not be human. One who lacks a mind that feels shame and aversion would not be human. One who lacks a mind that feels modesty and compliance would not be human, and one who lacks a mind that knows right and wrong would not be human, he said. In India, from 600 BC, the followers of Charvaka, also known as Lakayata, one of the earliest materialist philosophies, denied the existence of anything unverifiable. This was a popular belief system in India before the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism. They held that the rational approach to life was to enjoy the here and now and avoid suffering. While life is yours, live joyously. No one can avoid death's searching eye. When this body of ours is burnt, how can it ever return again? They said. Charvakas held truth, integrity, consistency, and freedom of thought in the highest esteem. In Southern Africa, the concept of Ubuntu, a person is a person through other people, has been popular as a humanist philosophy, particularly in the transition from colonial to majority rule. Barack Obama said of Nelson Mandela that he understood the ties that bind the human spirit. There's a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, that describes his greatest gift, his recognition that we're all bound together in ways that can be invisible to the eye, that there's a oneness to humanity, that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us. In the West, Aristotle answered the question of how to find meaning and fulfillment in life. He used the term eudaimonia, the condition of human flourishing or living well. He believed that humans could find a meaningful life for themselves by using their natural talents to the best of their ability. For Aristotle, that meant using their ability to reason. Epicurus, also in Greece, was an empiricist. He believed that the world could be understood through the human senses. He held that the good life could be found through freedom from fear and pain, specifically through losing fear of divine retribution. The conquest of fear, especially fear of unaccountable divine beings who meddle in nature at will, means a reduction in the sum total of human pain and suffering, and opens a door to the calm acceptance of a new picture of the world, a world in which nature is autonomous and where there are ideal beings who never meddle. And through fear, losing fear of one's own death. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death is not, and when death is come, we are not. Western philosophers of the Enlightenment period, the 1700s, are commonly thought to be the founders of modern humanism. Two examples are Amelia de Châtelet and David Hume. Amelia de Châtelet was a contemporary of Sir Isaac Newton and René Descartes, and was a natural philosopher, mathematician, and physicist. She wrote a translation of Newton's Principia that's still the definitive French version, and added significant proofs of her own. She championed the rights of women. "If I were king," she wrote, "I would reform an abuse which effectively cuts back half of humanity. I would have women participate in all human rights, and above all, those of the mind." She also wrote a critical analysis of the entire Bible. She died from complications of childbirth when she was just 42, and today her name is largely forgotten. Scottish philosopher David Hume said, "A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence and should always reject the greater miracle." He believed that benevolence towards others tends to promote the interests of our species and bestow happiness on human society. Thomas Paine authored The Rights of Man. He argued that government must be by the consent of the people, who had natural human rights that must be respected. In the Age of Reason, he advocated for understanding the world through reason rather than through revelation, the word of God. Mary Wollstonecraft was another of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment. Her treatise on democracy and human rights, Vindication of the Rights of Man, predated Paine's Rights of Man by 2 years. She followed that up with Vindication of the Rights of Women, which held that the inequality of women at the time was a product of the denial of education to women, and argued that education of women and girls would be of huge benefit to society. In recent times, Bertrand Russell was a prominent humanist, as well as scientist, philosopher, and mathematician. He wrote about his worldview in Why I'm Not a Christian, and was a member of Humanist UK's Standing Advisory Council, as well as president of Cardiff Humanists until his death. During the Cold War, Russell published the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, signed by Russell, Einstein, and 9 other prominent scientists, appealing for nuclear disarmament. In it, Russell said, "There lies before us, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, nothing lies before you but universal death." Karl Popper has had a huge influence on our understanding of objective truth and our primary mechanism for understanding it, the scientific method. He also was influential in battling authoritarianism with his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, and other writings. In his view, the main function of democracy is to answer the question, how is the state to be constituted so that bad rulers can be got rid of without bloodshed, without violence? Clearly, his answer to the question of how should I behave is to promote stable, non-violent society. Betty Chambers was executive assistant to scientist and author Isaac Asimov when he was president of the American Humanist Association. She was president herself from 1973 to 1979. She said this about finding fulfillment in life. "Humanism is the light of my life and the fire in my soul. It's the deep felt conviction in every fiber of my being that human love is a power far transcending the relentless onward rush of our largely deterministic cosmos. All human life must seek a reason for existence within the bounds of an uncaring physical world, and it's love, coupled with empathy, democracy, and a commitment to selfless service, which undergirds the faith of a humanist." The Australian ethicist Peter Singer, awarded Australian Humanist of the Year in 2004, had an influential answer to how should I behave. He saw altruism as beginning at home, then expanding to our wider family and friends, our local community, then globally. He said, "The only justifiable stopping place for the expansion of altruism is the point at which all whose welfare can be affected by our actions are included within the circle of altruism. This means that all beings with the capacity to feel pleasure or pain should be included." Singer is the founder of the animal liberation movement. His books include Animal Liberation and The Life You Can Save on effective altruism. You've probably heard of some or all of these well-known humanists: David Attenborough, Margaret Atwood, Kristen Bell, Andrew Copson, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Fry, Tim Minchin, Fiona Patton, Steven Pinker, Philip Pullman, Alice Roberts, Peter Singer, Gloria Steinem, and Emma Thompson. Does anyone have any questions so far? Let's now take a look at modern humanist organisations. If you share humanist values, you're not alone. Humanists International is the global union of humanist organisations. Its president, Andrew Copson, welcomed Humanists Australia at our official launch in December 2020. Humanists International campaigns on humanist issues, defends humanists at risk, lobbies for humanist values at international institutions, and works to build the humanist movement around the world. You may have heard of it referred to by its previous name, IHEU, the International Humanist and Ethical Union. All member organisations of Humanists International are required to signify acceptance of the IHEU Minimum Statement on Humanism. Humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. It stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethic based on human and other natural values in the spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. It's not theistic, and it does not accept supernatural views of reality. In 2002, the IHEU General Assembly adopted the Amsterdam Declaration as the official defining statement of world humanism. It was updated in 2022. Humanists strive to be ethical. Humanists strive to be rational. Humanists strive for fulfillment in their lives. Humanism meets the widespread demand for a source of meaning and purpose to stand as an alternative to dogmatic religion, authoritarian nationalism, tribal sectarianism, and selfish nihilism. There is a lot more to the Amsterdam 2022 declaration that you can read at bit.ly/hi-Amsterdam 2022. Does anyone have any questions about the minimum statement or the Amsterdam Declaration? Some other notable international humanist organisations include Humanists UK, the American Humanist Association, and the New Zealand Association of Rationalists and Humanists. Here in Australia, there are humanist societies in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. The Council of Australian Humanist Societies for many years served as an umbrella organisation for coordinating activities of the state societies, which in the past also included WA, South Australia, and ACT. Now a new model is needed, which is why we've created Humanists Australia, an organisation that any Australian humanist can join. In the past, many services people needed were provided by religious institutions. Australian humanist organisations have worked for many years towards separation of church and state in education and other areas. Humanists now provide secular alternatives for marriage and funeral celebrants and pastoral care or chaplaincy. Humanists Australia is a registered charity with 4 main charitable purposes: to educate all Australians about humanism as a framework for an ethical, meaningful, and fulfilling life, to encourage the formation of and provide support for diverse and inclusive humanist communities around Australia, to support people persecuted as a result of their humanist beliefs, both in Australia and working with Humanists International overseas, and to advocate for policies that reduce societal inequalities, advance secularism, advance human rights, and improve quality of life, guided by reason and evidence. Humanists Australia has published what they believe are the core humanist values, with descriptions that help explain what humanism means to our members. The 9 core values are compassion, community, reason, diversity, resolve, integrity, culture, environment, and forgiveness. We'll explore these in more depth later. Humanists Australia has recently prepared a strategic plan which encompasses 5 programs across the 4 mission goals. The programs are campaigns, ceremonies, well-being, communities, and engagement. These help to provide the organisation with financial sustainability and help to develop the staff and members of the organisation. Part 4, Humanist Answers. We've seen how humanist philosophers and organised humanism have worked towards finding answers to the deep questions of human existence. While these questions are not the type to have one single correct answer, let's explore how humanism can be a framework for individuals to find their own answers. It's the Middle Ages and you're a farmer in a small village. One day you find your cow dead in a field. How do you explain the cow's death? It's human nature to want to find someone to blame. You know your neighbour, an elderly widow, has been jealous of your prosperity. You accuse her of cursing your cow. The other villagers take your side and burn your neighbour as a witch. 2 days later, your other cow dies. Suppose instead you believe that God is punishing you by causing the death of your cow. You rack your brains trying to figure out what you've done wrong. You've noticed that your son has what might be an unnatural affection for one of the other village boys. You drive your son from your home in the hopes of pleasing God. 2 days later, your other cow dies. Suppose instead you've been carefully observing all the village cows and their environment. You'd noticed that several days before your cow died, a strange new plant had grown up in the village pasture. A few of the cows started looking unwell around that time. You move your remaining cow to the higher pasture. Some of the other villagers take heed of what you say and also move their cows. 2 days later, one of the cows that had stayed in the lower pasture dies. All of the cows in the higher pasture recover and do well. The villagers work together to eradicate the poisonous weed in the lower pasture and are able to save the remaining cows. This is how science began. By observation and experimentation, we can discover the real root causes of misfortunes. This gives us some measure of control over our lives. Science may not always have the answer, and scientists are liable to human failings like greed and bias, but science is still the best mechanism we have for understanding the world, hoping to control it. Let's look at some real examples from 2020. There have been at least 3 narratives about the origin of the coronavirus pandemic. Just as in the case of the dead cow, humans want to find someone to blame. The idea that the Chinese deliberately caused the pandemic or that it escaped from a Chinese lab, has done nothing but exacerbate international tensions and racism. The US and Chinese governments have both, at various stages of the pandemic, tried to minimize it and pretend that it was not a real problem. In the early days, local officials in Wuhan, scared of bringing bad news to their higher-ups, did not report the outbreak until it was too late to stop its spread. In the case of the US, a continued insistence by Donald Trump that the pandemic was not real had millions of people believing that it's a hoax, even as they were brought into intensive care. Lack of coordination and active undermining of scientific responses by the former federal government and some state governments, as well as concerted anti-scientific misinformation spread by social media, have contributed to a death rate in the US that has now resulted in over 1 million deaths. In Australia, state governments have listened carefully to scientific expertise and followed the advice of experts, as unpalatable as that has been. The combination of lockdowns, mask mandates, and quarantine systems allowed us to delay the peak of the pandemic until after almost everyone who wanted to be vaccinated was, which has helped keep our death rate relatively low. A scientific understanding of the origins of the virus, human exploitation of wildlife, gives us hope that we can reduce the rate of new infectious diseases arising in the future. Initially, the terrible bushfires we suffered in the summer of 2019-20 were blamed on arsonists by misinformation spread via social media, certain media outlets, and indeed by the federal government. Peter Dutton said in Parliament, "Did the bushfires start in some of these regions because of climate change? No, it started because somebody lit a match." A careful analysis of the data showed that lightning was mostly responsible for ignition. In my role at the time as president of the Council of Australian Humanist Societies, I received a letter from someone claiming that Australia experienced these horrific fires as punishment from God for voting for marriage equality in 2019. What kind of a God is it that punishes yes and no voters alike for giving equal rights to minority groups? Scientific consensus is that climate change is driving more prolonged droughts and more extreme weather events, both of which are contributing to greater incidence and severity of bushfires. Until and unless we get climate change under control, we can continue to expect severe bushfire seasons and have to learn how to deal with them. Humanists believe that meaning is not imposed on our lives by being part of someone else's grand plan. Rather, we have the human capacity to discover our own purpose in life, and that there are as many ways to find meaning and fulfillment as there are human beings. People who have discovered meaning and purpose for themselves usually find that, as Aristotle suggested, It involves making use of your own natural talents and abilities, your superpowers. Use your creativity and imagination to envisage a brighter future for your family, your community, the animals and environment around you, or the world. Then build caring relationships with other people as you use your superpowers to work towards that brighter future. James Hemming, British psychologist and humanist, said, "The meaning of life is to live it as wholly as you can, as bravely as we can, here and now, sharing the experience with others as we care for ourselves and accepting our responsibility for leaving the world better than we found it." We have Humanists Australia is running on the 20th of June, a session devoted to finding meaning and fulfillment in life. It's going to be run by Les. Do you want to say anything about your session, Les? He's with us here today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, just briefly. So I'll be talking about how humanism is meaningful for me and how I came to be a humanist. And then I'll talk about 3 of the core principles of humanism. And then I'll end up with how a humanist sees the good life.
That session will be free to financial members of Humanists Australia. Non-members are asked to pay $10 per ticket. You can find the tickets available through the link on our Humanists Australia meetup group. For many people, religion is a comfort they turn to when they're grieving. The idea of being reunited with loved ones in heaven can be a consolation. Without the belief in heaven, humanists find comfort in other ways. Lives don't have to be permanent to be valuable and meaningful. I can take comfort in the fact that my loved one existed and still has an important place in my heart. I don't have to struggle to understand God's plan or wonder why I'm being punished. I don't have to fear the eternal damnation of my loved one, which is especially important for those who have lost a loved one through suicide. Love doesn't end at death. The grief that we feel is the price we pay for love and a reminder of the love that we shared. I know that loving relationships with family and friends will help give me the resilience that I need to work through the grief. Seeking and finding new purpose in life by joining a club or getting a new job or volunteering for a charity can help lift me out of grief by focusing on that new purpose. Humanists live for the one life that we have. We have no expectation of eternal life in either heaven or hell. While to some people it might seem frightening to think of no longer existing, for many, the understanding that we need not fear eternal damnation or even an eternity of existence in heaven comes as a great relief. What might non-existence be like? We remember nothing from before we were born, and we remember nothing from the dreamless periods of our sleep each night. We can expect the loss of consciousness that comes with death to be like that. As Epicurus said, when death is come, we are not. Although the process of dying may cause suffering, we believe suffering ends at the end of life. For that reason, most humanists are strong supporters of voluntary assisted dying. Knowing that life is temporary brings focus to our lives. We try to live each day as if it is our last. While we don't believe in a personal life after death, we know that part of us will live on. Our genes, if we have children, our art, music, writings and other works, and the memory of our words and actions in our loved ones and community. Some of the anxiety that arises when we contemplate our own deaths is the fear of what will become of those who depend on us. A humanist living within a strong, supportive community can be reassured that their loved ones have others who will care for them and support them. How should I behave? Philosophers divide ethics into systems based on rules, consequences, or virtues. Humanists tend to prefer thinking about consequences or ethics based on virtues rather than insisting on hard and fast rules. What consequences would humanists like to see from our actions? Thinking about the other 4 questions helps us understand the importance of building a society that supports and nourishes the humans living in it, the environment we share, and the animals that also experience suffering. Humanists Australia has published values, some of which are virtues, that have descriptions that are rule-like to help clarify their meaning, but think of them as guidance rather than rigid rules. Let's take a look at the values. We value compassion. This means that we have compassion for all humans and other feeling beings. We strive to understand their point of view and individual needs. We speak respectfully to each other, even when we disagree. We value reason. This means that when making decisions, we use evidence and rational thought to assess the likely impact of our actions. We value the information obtained through ongoing scientific research and recognize that this evolves and changes over time. We value community because it's the caring relationships of a strong, supportive community that help all humans get through the tough times in life. This means that we believe in the importance of community and act locally to build a global network of people with shared values. We value diversity. This means that we believe the strength of humanity lies in diversity. We welcome people of all ethnicities, sexual orientation, and cultural backgrounds, and strive to ensure they feel included. We value and respect people for their own sake, and treat them ethically as equals. We believe all should have the same rights and opportunities. I've heard that we should tolerate rather than respect people with views that differ from our own, because it's important that we criticize false and damaging beliefs. This is a misunderstanding of what it means to respect another person. It doesn't mean you must pretend their beliefs are valid. What it means is that when arguing against their beliefs, you never resort to the name-calling, threats, belittling, and intimidation of people. That's all too common now in our public discourse. It's absolutely essential that we continue to call out harmful and incorrect beliefs through rational argument and emotional stories, but never through personal attacks. We value integrity. This means that we're open, honest, and above board in all that we do. If something is on our mind, we communicate it respectfully and tactfully. We value resolve because it's the heart of what we need to do to work together to build a better world. We are determined to stand up for what we believe is right. We strive to work for a better future for ourselves, our family, our community, and the world. We're not afraid to speak truth to power. We persevere even in the face of adversity. We value our environment because plants and animals are wonderful works of nature with their own intrinsic worth, and because animals, including humans, suffer as their environment degrades, and because the future of humanity relies on having healthy environments where people can thrive. We value and respect the planet and all the life it contains. We work to promote and sustain our ecosystem and reduce the environmental impacts of our industrial processes and resource consumption. We're currently running a series of environmental support messages. You can sign up to that through our environment page on our campaign's website. We value culture. That means that we value great works of art, music, literature, and architecture, regardless of their origin, and respect culturally significant landscapes, geological formations, and artifacts. We support their preservation and believe in fair, equitable, and culturally sensitive access for all. Finally, we value forgiveness. When dialogue between opposite sides in a debate breaks down into name-calling, threats, or abuse, it's forgiveness that can restore civility. When communities are at war with each other in never-ending tit-for-tat cycles of violence, it's forgiveness that can break them out of it. Part of being human is making mistakes. When we make a mistake, we apologize and do our best to make amends. When someone errs against us, we try to forgive. Does anyone have any questions about the values? So in conclusion, humanity's search for answers finds them within ourselves, from our own human capacity for curiosity, reason, and love. This is humanism. Hey, any questions on anything I've spoken about today? Thank you, Mel. Liz?
I've got a comment, if you like, Mary-Anne, just on community as you're going through. There was an emphasis on support. At times it's needed if you're in a community, or I think it was for those left behind, which is very valid. But I wanted to add also that in community we can achieve more and have more fun when we work together as a group.
Yes. Liz?
Yeah, my question kind of feeds in directly to what Rod was just saying. With Mary-Anne, with the demise in religious belief here in Australia and other Western democracies, more so over the last 10, 20 years, people who used to go to church, I noticed church attendance is down to about 5-10% regular church attendance. But so for those religious people who used to find community within their church, mosque, can you say a little bit more about humanist role in rebuilding those communities in a different frame, what we're doing about it, how it can help?
One of the main reasons that we place communities as central to Humanists Australia was precisely that religion is declining, and that with the decline of religion, people are losing the support from communities that they used to have as part of their religion. And so we need to replace that with something. And I feel that humanist communities give us that opportunity to find people with shared beliefs and find community through them. Humanists Australia is now helping to set up communities around the nation. We currently have 3 pilot communities in central Melbourne, Perth, and Canberra, and we are hoping to start one up in central Sydney very soon. If you're interested in setting up a community in your area, get in touch with us and we can help provide you with support. For example, a budget that you can work within, a meetup group where you can attract people to your events, and ideas for events, and support and mentoring from other people who are running communities. Andrea?
Hi, yeah, just a follow-up comment before I get onto my question. Yeah, the work that Humanism Australia does with the life stages kind of situations is probably something I undervalue, because it's not something I've been very exposed to, but it's really reassuring to know that that's there. So that's really, yeah, every time I hear about that, it's really great. My question, I should have probably asked before, after I think section 2, and I suppose it's a bit of an open question about how we assess our beliefs and the humanist values that we're following, especially thinking of Aristotle and some of the pretty weird ideas that he had about women. And I don't know if this comes up very often. Aristotle thought that women were not fit for public life because they suffered from hysteria and were mutilated males. So, yeah.
This is a question that often comes up when people are talking about the origins of humanism. You can look at people from past times and judge them by the standards of today. And we know that many of the ideas that were held in the past, we no longer believe to be true, and have been, we have beliefs that our beliefs today, we believe, support everyone in our society better than ideas that have been held in the past. For example, thinking that slavery is acceptable, or thinking that it's okay to marry a girl off to someone at the age of 12, all those sorts of beliefs in the past. When we think about the origins of humanism, we need to think of threads of humanism that run through prior times. And we need to select for ourselves the threads that are valid today and reject the threads that are invalid.
Yeah, I'm not trying to cancel Aristotle. I sort of more meant that I don't know if Aristotle thought that he was using the best available evidence, yet believed these things without evidence. So yeah, it's just a matter of not falling into the same trap, I guess, and being bound by some strange beliefs at the time.
Yes, humanism strives to not be dogmatic, and we should always be prepared to change our beliefs when new evidence comes to light. Alex.
Thanks, Mary-Anne. What's humanism's position on atheism? So if humanism is about being, good without God and those sort of things, are humanists also atheists, or are humanists separate from atheists in their stance?
Humanists are also atheists, but we're more than atheists, because we're not just non-belief in God. We have beliefs in how we should relate to each other and support each other. And we have values. We have the Amsterdam Declaration and the IHEU minimum statement, all of which are positive statements of beliefs and values that atheists do not necessarily share. Not all atheists are humanists. So, for example, you can have neo-Nazi atheists. So it's not a contradiction. There is a strong thread of misogyny running through some atheist communities. Mel.
Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely awesome. I guess my sort of point is we need to start convincing other people, I guess other Australians or other people in the world, to humanism. And how best do we start broadcasting this message for people to become more humanist? I guess, how best do we go about exporting this to others?
Our 2023 to 25 strategic plan is pretty well devoted to that question. There is a video recording of the presentation that I gave on that session available on our website. We go to humanistaustralia.org. Our strategy page under what we do. This video session here on our current strategic plan goes through how we can get the word out to as many people as possible.
I think it's fair to say at the moment our focus on doing that is building communities, with the idea that people will experience humanism in action, rather than just hearing about it. I mean, if they want to dig into the depths, there's a lot of good information, including this presentation that Mary-Anne's giving today, which is great. But to get people even interested in hearing about it, getting them into communities is one way of doing that.
Another thing that we are doing is running regular events, which you can find on Meetup.
Yep. And also with the celebrants program, if people come to a wedding or a funeral and are told that the celebrant is doing a humanist ceremony, or they are a humanist celebrant, maybe they'll go home and ask some questions about what that means.
Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Mary-Anne. Can you talk about humanism and secularism?
Secularism is one of our focuses. It means the separation of church and state. It means that we should not have to have our lives curtailed by other people's religions. We believe as humanists that everyone should have the right to follow their own beliefs, that they should be permitted to worship the way they want to worship, as long as it does not harm other people. Is that enough information, Sam? I could go on.
Thank you.
True.
Just actually following on from Sam's point, from what I've seen, a lot of the secularist movement stuff is quite clear on that live and let live, as long as it's not sort of in each other's faces type thing. And that's not as apparent in some of the humanist messaging so far. And it might be worth expanding on our relationship to secularism.
Do you mean it's not as apparent that we want to live and let live, or not as apparent that we're about secularism?
Not as apparent that we're okay to let people live and let live with their own beliefs.
I'll take that message on board. Thank you, Drew. Did anyone else have a question? So I've got some links here. We've got links to these slides, the Humanists Australia website, our meetup group, and we have a YouTube channel where I'll post this video, and there's videos, some other videos there of other events. And I'd like to thank Lyndon Story for providing some of the quotes in this slide deck, and the Little Book of Humanism written by Andrew Copson and Alice Roberts from Humanists UK is well worth reading. Dark Emu is well worth reading if you want to find out more about First Nations peoples in Australia. And if you're experiencing grief, the article Grief Comes in Waves from the Loss Foundation is very helpful, and there's a book, Comforting Thoughts About Death That Have Nothing to Do with God, by Greta Christina. So thank you very much for coming along today, and if you're interested in finding out more, visit humanistaustralia.org or meet fellow humanists at a Humanists Australia meetup.